Dear colleagues, it's 3 o'clock. Good afternoon, everybody, colleagues and guests. Let me declare open a session of the Dissertation Council for the thesis of Katysheva Vladimirovna for the degree of Candidate of Historical Sciences, Specialization 07001, Found History of International Relations and Foreign Policy, on the theme Evolution of Foreign Policy of Mexico, the period 2000-2018, according to the order of St. Petersburg University, the February 17, 2020, number 1032/1, me, Tsvetkova Natalia Alexandrovna, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Associate Professor and Head of Department of American Studies at St. Petersburg University, was appointed Chairman of this Dissertation Council. In accordance with the order of St. Petersburg University of the 23rd of March 2020, number 2304/1, our meeting is held in the remote access mode, which includes my colleagues, members of the Council, and the applicant, respected Oxana Vladimirovna. So let me introduce Council members present today. Kubyshkin Alexander Ivanovich, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Theory and Methodology of Teaching Humanities at Petersburg University. Can you see and hear us, Alexander Ivanovich? Good afternoon. Yes, I can see you. Kostyuk Ruslan Vasilovich, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Theory and History of International Relations of St. Petersburg University. Can you see and hear us, Ruslan Vasilovich? Good afternoon. Ivanovsky Zbigniew Vladislavovich, Doctor of Political Sciences, Head of Center for Political Studies of the Latin American Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Zbigniew Vladislavovich, can you see and hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you. Good afternoon again. Good to see you. Detlef Nolte, PhD, leading researcher of the German Institute for Global and Regional Studies, Germany. Professor Nolte, can you see and hear us?
Yes.
Да, слышу.
Yes.
Очень рады.
We are very glad, Dr. Nolte. And the degree applicant, Katysheva Oxana Vladimirovna, can you see and hear us? Yes, thank you. Also, in touch with us is the academic supervisor, Haifetz Viktor Lazarevich, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Professor of Department of Theory and History of International Relations at Petersburg University. Viktor Lazarevich, can you hear and see us? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Yes, I can see you. So we are very glad to hear that. The academic advisor shall be given the floor after the applicant's presentation and reviews by the Dissertation Council members. And in the meantime, I am asking Viktor Lazarevich to mute incoming sound and camera. So all the members of the Dissertation Council, as well as the applicant, are present, and we can all hear and see each other. Dear colleagues, since our meeting is held in the remote access mode, in accordance with St. Petersburg University order of the 23rd of March 2020, 2304/1, I invite all the participants to follow the procedure closely. In case there's a technical failure and to stop seeing and hearing someone, please let me know. I will announce a technical break until such issues are eliminated. The technical break means we all stay connected until connection is reestablished. If the connection with me is lost, the announcement shall be made by Kubyshkin Alexander Ivanovich. Alexander Ivanovich, do you agree? Yes, I agree. So, please, I invite you to call a technical break if you stop seeing me. Dear council members, do you have any objections? Alexander Ivanovich, I think no. Let's continue. Let me also inform you that our meeting is being recorded and broadcast online at St. Petersburg University website, and the speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian into English or from English into Russian. Thank you to the translators. And moreover, the applicant's page currently displays an email address to which anyone can send questions to the applicant regarding her thesis and her ongoing scientific discussion of these questions shall be forwarded to me, and I shall read them out during the discussion part. The questions should be related strictly to the applicant's presentation and the contents of her thesis. It's also necessary to indicate the full name, position, place of work of the author. Questions that are not related to the scientific discussion or to the text of the thesis shall not be presented. Dear colleagues, according to the federal law of the 23rd of August 1996, number 127, federal law on science and the state scientific and technical policy, St. Petersburg University has the right to award academic degrees independently. A corresponding order on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, on the basis of which we are holding this session, has been issued on the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1. Hereinafter, I shall refer to it as the procedure or the order. In accordance with this order, a session of the Dissertation Council is duly constituted if at least 2/3 of the approved members of the Council are present, but not less than 4 persons. Our Dissertation Council consists of 5 members. All 5 members are present, all in the remote interactive mode. Audio-visual contact has been established with all of them and the degree applicant. Thus, dear colleagues, we have the quorum. I instruct the curator of today's defense officer, the Dissertation Council's Activity Support Department, Sazonova Ekaterina Vyacheslavna, to draw up the attendance list in which all the council members present shall be listed and their work mode, in this case, remote work mode. And finally, dear colleagues, let me set forth the procedure of today's session with the total duration of approximately 2 hours. First, the chairman's summary report on the main content of documents submitted by the degree applicant and their compliance with the applicable requirements, answers to possible questions, 5 minutes. Second, a brief presentation by the degree applicant outlining the key points of her research. Oxana, Vladimirovna, you have approximately 15 minutes. Okay. Questions to the applicant strictly on her report. No more than 2 minutes per question. And I will interrupt you with your permission. I will follow the time very closely. 4. Answers of the applicant. No more than 5 minutes for all the questions. No more than 5 minutes. Next, speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council with their reviews of the thesis, statements of their opinions, questions and suggestions to the applicant. Dear colleagues, no more than 10 minutes for each speaker. With your permission, I shall interrupt you. That shall be followed by the speech of the chairman and her review, no more than 10 minutes. That should be followed by answers of the applicant to questions and comments made by the members of the Dissertation Council, not more than 15 minutes. Open discussion. Speeches and questions to the applicant strictly on the topic of her study, no more than 5 minutes each question. At that point, we shall also read out questions sent by email, if any. Finally, Now, final answers of the applicant to questions asked. Oxana, Vladimirovna, you have 5 minutes for that. And speech of the academic advisor of the applicant, no more than 3 minutes. That shall be followed by a discussion by the members of the Decision Council before the open voting, if we decide we need such discussion. So that should take approximately 5 minutes. Next, open individual voting and counting the votes by the chairman of the Dissertation Council, and the results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Decision on awarding or not awarding the St. Petersburg University academic degree to the applicant, and closing remarks of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, do you have questions or objections to this procedure? If there are no objections, let's start running the procedure. But first of all, please remember to switch off your mobile phones. Thank you for your understanding. So, dear colleagues, let me start with the chairman summary report. Tsvetkova Natalia Alexandrovna. The thesis by Katysheva Oxana Vladimirovna, the degree of candidate of historical sciences, specialty 070015, history of international relations and foreign policy. The theme, evolution of foreign policy of Mexico in 2018, was submitted to defense by the order of the academic secretary of St. Petersburg University, the order number 1030/1. The Dissertation Council was appointed by the order of the academic secretary of St. Petersburg University on the 17th of February 2020, 1032/1, and I have already introduced its members to you, dear colleagues and guests. Katysheva Oxana Vladimirovna wrote her thesis on the basis of St. Petersburg University. The academic advisor of Oxana Vladimirovna Katysheva is Doctor of History, Professor of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Professor of the Department of Theory and History of International Relations at St. Petersburg University, Ifet Viktor Lazarovich. The number of publications of the applicant, which set out the main scientific results of her research, according to the enclosed list, is 8, including publications in the list approved by the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation, 4 publications. In journals indexed in the Web of Science and Scopus scientific databases, no publications. The applicant submitted to the academic secretary of St. Petersburg University a full package of documents for her thesis to be accepted for consideration and defense. All the documents comply with Article 12, Section 3 of the order. All the documents submitted by the applicant, according to the information I received from the curator, comply with the requirements and are kept in the applicant's attestation file. Copies are available from the officer of the Decision Council Support Department and curator of our meeting, Ekaterina Vyacheslavna Sazonova, who is currently in touch with us. Before I give the floor to the degree applicant, do you, dear council members and colleagues, have any general questions to the applicant? And is there a need to review the entire list of documents submitted by the applicant? I hope nobody has any questions. Then, Oksana Vladimirovna, the floor is yours. Let me remind you that you have 15 minutes. Please remember your presentation. Remember to start your presentation, please. Good afternoon, dear Chairman, dear members of the Dissertation Council. I would like to present to your attention a thesis on the theme Evolution of Mexican Foreign Policy, 2018. Hold on a second. Can everybody see the presentation? Can everyone see the presentation? The answer is yes. The relevance of my thesis is determined by a whole set of factors. The following are the key factors that predetermine the research interest in the evolution of Mexican foreign policy at the beginning of the 20th century. Some growth potential of Mexico as one of the possible poles of new emerging global architecture, at least as a part of the potential pole that the Latin American region could become. Special nature of relations with the United States and the same cultural historical belonging to Latin America, which intermediate position of Mexico between two civilizationally different communities. Mexico's unique geostrategic position between the United States and Latin America, between the two oceans, the Pacific and the Atlantic, which provides an opportunity to strengthen the regional and global role of the state. Intensification of Mexico's foreign policy in the beginning of the 21st century, as well as a number of transformations in the system of international relations of the state. Systematic attempts by Mexico to diversify its foreign policy and foreign economic relations, which require close examination both in terms of theoretical analysis in history of international relations and foreign policy and in terms of diplomatic practices. The purpose of my thesis was to identify the main characteristics of the evolution of Mexico's foreign policy during the period from between 2000 and 2018 and to reveal the peculiarities of the bilateral and multilateral relations with key partners in different regions of the world. To achieve this goal, the author pursued the following objectives: to study the key factors that have shaped the Mexican-American bilateral agenda in the 21st century and to assess the dynamics of bilateral relations during the period 2000-2018. To identify peculiarities in the development of Mexican-Canadian relations, analyze prerequisites and peculiarities of the process to reform the North American Free Trade Area, which was replaced at the beginning of the 21st century by the agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, USMCA, in the context of Mexico's foreign policy priorities, study the evolution of the three presidential administration approaches to the Latin American region, and to determine its place in the foreign policy strategy and practice of the state. To examine the essence of multilateral interaction between Mexico and the European Union and to identify the logic behind their relationship, to follow the evolution of Mexico's foreign policy towards the Asia-Pacific region, to assess dynamics of relations with China, identify peculiarities of interaction with Japan, and determine the terms of Mexico-Korean relations. To clarify the significance of Middle Eastern foreign policy in overall foreign policy strategy of Mexico. To evaluate Russia's place in the country's foreign policy priorities. The object of my study is the foreign policy of Mexico in 2000-2018. In some cases, the logic of analysis has led to events prior and after this period. The subject of my study is the nature and peculiarities of national priorities, approaches and practical measures implemented by the government of Mexico to address specific objectives of foreign policy in their historical dynamics in relation to certain states or groups of states. The theoretical methodological basis of the thesis consists of principles and methods, historical science in general, as well as general scientific methods of cognition. In the course of my research, the author relies on interdisciplinary, integrative, and multi-factor approach, follows the principle of scientific objectivity, specific problem method, providing systematization of material in accordance with the geopolitical principle, which made it possible to reveal regularities of international cooperation with countries and regions of the world at the beginning of the 21st century. The historical critical method has found its application in work with certain type of sources, first of all, with personal interviews, publications, internet resources. The need to analyze the activity of three presidential administrations predetermined the use of the comparative historical method. The descriptive method made it possible to reveal the contents of the main direction of Mexico's foreign policy and to demonstrate its results in the content of general historical process. The author studies the evolution of Mexico's foreign policy through interaction with specific historical events and phenomena, that is, in accordance with the principle of historicism. The author uses quantitative method, content analysis, and case study method to solve specific problems. The source base of the is divided into two groups of sources, comparative and narrative. The main hypothesis of my thesis, recognizing the fact that a number of political decisions were made by the Mexican government mainly under the influence of the conjuncture, which caused notable difference and counter tendencies both in foreign policy priorities and in the choice of foreign policy instruments. The constant of the whole policy process during the period between 2000 and 2008 was economic aspects, namely trade and investment cooperation of Mexico aimed at solving domestic, social, economic and political problems, which predetermined a significant share of the continuity of the three administrations, regardless of party belonging, and led to qualitative evolution of political process in its geographical aspect. The study made it possible to come to the following conclusions. A comprehensive analysis of the regional dimension of foreign policy by Fox Quesada, Filipa Calderona and Nieto allowed us to trace a certain evolution of ideas and diplomatic practices against the background of relative continuity of foreign policy objectives. The most stable element of foreign policy was a trade and economic component based on the model of economic liberalism, which became a traditional element of Mexico's foreign policy in the late 20th century. The North American Free Trade Agreement was fundamental for Mexico and consolidated the main vector of its development, fixing a steady political and economic dependence on the United States. None of the presidential administrations under consideration at the beginning of the 21st century managed to form a tangible counterbalance to the North American dominance through multi-vector and intensive interaction with other international players. Despite consistent attempts to diversify ties, which, however, not a new element to the Mexican foreign policy, as they have been discovered already in the end of the 20th century. The problem of conceptual thinking about their priorities or its own foreign policy in the long run remains relevant to Mexico. The global strategy of too superficial achieved concrete political and economic benefits in the short term prevailed over the problem of long-term strategic planning, which had a direct projection on the regional dimension of the state foreign policy. The first chapter of my thesis confirms that trade and security are two systematically important elements in the Mexican-American relations. Both these elements are shaped by obvious political and economic asymmetry of the partners. Both have impact not only on the complex social, economic and social relations of the States, but also on the entire system of ties with the Western Hemisphere. The Mexican-Canadian ties are of secondary importance for Mexican foreign policy in the North American region, made in the shadow of Mexican-American relations, which confirms the analysis of institutional development of bilateral contacts, the scope and content of bilateral cooperation, the volume of trade and investment cooperation between Mexico and the United States and Canada. In the first chapter, the author concludes the degree of correlation between the socio-economic development of Mexico and the state of the United States economy remains exceptionally high, and relations with the United States are an absolute priority of Mexican diplomacy, while Mexico has never truly challenged its geostrategic leadership of the United States. As part of NAFTA Mexico City reform negotiations, it was critical to maintain the course of the deepening North American negotiation, and the new USMCA agreement clearly has the potential to ensure continuity of regional economic development processes. On the second chapter, the author concludes that none of the three presidential administrations have been able to formulate a complete foreign policy strategy with respect to the Latin American region as one of the most important regional dimensions of Mexico's foreign policy. Western-oriented foreign policy approach of folks led, on the one hand, to a clash between traditional Mexican foreign policy principles such as non-interference and legal equality of states, and the principles democratization, protection of human rights, and on the other hand, conflicted with the regional development trends of the left, turn left Latin America, which led to a tangible loss of Mexico's position in the region. government of Philip Calderon faced the challenge of reintegrating Mexico in the Latin American community, which required a pragmatic foreign policy. Intensification of this trend yielded some results, but due to the fundamental policy and ideological contradictions between various political forces within Mexico and in Latin America in general, the new administration of Peña Nieto was able to build on some of the achievements of its predecessors, working in alliance with State of Pacific Alliance, focused not on the Pacific Basin. Analyzing Mexico's foreign policy in the Central American direction, we should note an increasing role of the United States, especially in the context of for Mexico's foreign policy initiatives. A study in the third chapter concludes that a significant feature of relations with Mexico and Rio, both bilateral and multilateral, is a systematic nature of contacts. Since entry in the global agreement between Mexico and the EU, the institutional and legal system of relations has been actively developed, which led to a notable decentralization of contracts and decrease in overall dynamics. The Mexican initiative to reform the global agreement was to be a tool to overcome the inertia in this relationship. Arrival of Donald Trump had a significant impact of dynamics of negotiation in this issue, stimulating interest in direction of European non-EU and non-traditional Mexican partners. Relations between Russia and Mexico were not sufficiently balanced and were characterized by cautious and consistent strengthening of political dialogue against the background of limited trade and investment interaction. Constraints to development of Mexican-Russian relations were, first of all, certain dependence of Mexico on the USA, unwillingness of Mexico to perceive Russia as a Pacific power, domestic political agenda objectively dominating in Mexican society, and insufficient interest in Latin American region, and in particular Mexico on the part of Moscow. The analysis of the Asia-Pacific direction of Mexican foreign policy undertaken in Chapter 4 allowed the author to state that during the first part of the 21st century, the role of Asia-Pacific region as a key vector of diversification of trade and investment relations of the country has been consistently increasing, providing Mexico a whole set of tools to strengthen its global projection through intensive inclusion in regional and trans-regional forums. The work of TA and WTTP has been intensified. In the context of the dynamics of Mexico-Chinese demonstrate China's more active position, insufficiently formed strategy has to balance between China's promising project and dependence on the USA. However, Mexican diplomacy has been able to maintain political dialogue and develop economic interaction with most regional governments, which often compete with each other. Mexican-Japanese relations, due to its long historical tradition, continuity of Mexican foreign policy, can be characterized in the stable, trustful, and supportive. At the same time, relations between Mexico and Korea are dynamic. Beginning of the 21st century largely coincided with the beginning of formation of Mexican foreign policy approaches to the Middle East region. Of national trade and investment cooperation contributed to the reapproachment of Mexico with some countries in the region, especially sustainability ties. Mexico sought to participate in resolving regional crises through intergovernmental associations and was consistent in this position before the Calderon administration changed the UN voting pattern on the Arab-Israeli issue, acting as a neutral party. A state's position on the Middle East issues can often be linked to specific interests of political elites as well as the level of activity of lobby groups. Trade investment agenda is dominant and most effective. At the same time, the development of commercial ties with the Arab states is limited, especially as seen in the oil sector. Cooperation in the field of international security is the most systematically developing sphere. It's the regional context. The Mexican interaction in North American space is objectively of fundamental importance. Next in importance is the Latin American region, which, in the concept of Mexico foreign policy, is divided in two sub-regions along the functional Central American region and the South American region. The first is of key importance, mainly in the context of security issues, and the second in terms of political and economic integration. This is followed by the European direction of foreign policy, position due to deep cultural and historical ties, and in some cases, a high degree of institutionalization of relations. At the same time, the growing trend of shifting the vector of global political and economic development in the Asia-Pacific region, along with the notable dynamics of trade, investment ties, and political dialogue between Mexico and the countries of the Asia-Pacific region, indicates gradual growth of the region's position on the scale of Mexico's foreign policy priorities. Given the trend of Latin American Asia-Pacific convergence, it can be argued that the two regions have significant potential for constructive and mutually beneficial cooperation in the long term, which, of course, should be taken into account by the political leadership of Mexico in the strategic planning process. Far from the core of Mexico's policy is the Middle East region. Ambivalence of Mexico's position on most problematic regional issues manifests itself in the beginning of the 21st century, to some extent hampered the formation of strategic relations with the countries in the region. Summing it all up, we may say that the research hypothesis has been confirmed. Dear Chairman and Dissertation Council members, thank you for your attention. My presentation is over. Thank you, Oxana Vladimirovna. Thank you. Please remember to switch off the presentation. Your presentation was highly informative, and thank you for following the timing. Dear colleagues, do you have questions concerning the presentation or the thesis by Oxana Vladimirovna? We have the time to ask questions, but no more than 2 minutes, and the applicant shall answer if anyone has any questions at this point. I see there are no questions. Viktor Lazarovich, please switch the sound off. That's okay. Then, dear colleagues, let us proceed to the next point of our procedures, pictures of the members of the Dissertation Council with their assessment of the thesis, comments and suggestions to the applicant. But before we do that, these pictures, let me ask the applicant, Oxana Vladimirovna, how would you like to answer comments? Would you like to answer all questions in the end or after each question? After each speech of council members, or then I think it will be easier. I suggest that the applicant shall answer all questions, comments together. With your permission, before we start this, no external reviews have been submitted. And dear colleagues, since all the reviews have been published at the university website or for reviewing, I suggest that you focus only the key points, maybe skip the positive part and go straight to comments and questions. Do we have objections to that? Moreover, each speaker has no more than 10 minutes. Please follow the time closely, and I will interrupt. The order shall be as follows. First, Alexander Ivanovich Kubushkin. Number 2, Ruslan Vasilovich Kostuk. Next, Zbigniew Vladislavovich. Number 3, Dr. Nolta. Number 4, and finally myself, the chairman, Tsvetkova Natalia Alexandrovna, shall read my review in the end. That is why now we shall hear the reviews one by one, and then Oxana Vladimirovna shall answer the main questions, no more than 10 minutes. I would like to give the floor and give the opinion of the thesis, Professor Alexander Ivanovich Kubyshkin. Alexander Ivanovich, welcome. Thank you. Dear Chairman, dear members of the Dissertation Council, I will start with giving some praise. The thesis by Oxana Vladimirovna has been performed on a high scientific level and is dedicated to a very relevant, interesting topic. In recent years, Mexico was not in the focus of our foreign policy and international relations, and so this her thesis covers a significant gap in the study of this issue. The three administrations, relatively long period. So this is very interesting and well structured. I'd like to say that the range of sources and special literature used by the author is impressive and shows good understanding of the author. Yet, following the instructions, let me now proceed to some comments to which I would like the degree applicant to answer or comment. In my opinion, the theoretical part is too short. I mean, this concepts and doctrines of foreign policy, there's no general analysis except for plans for national development. Doesn't mention doctrines of Juarez, Carranza, doesn't mention, the author doesn't mention the very controversial doctrine of Cardenas and his successors. Should be emphasized in the great importance for defining the basic principles of the country's foreign policy, the Constitution of 1917, fruit of the revolution of 1910-1917. Next, the first chapter only briefly discusses the problem of combating drug trafficking, pages 55-56. However, this problem largely determines the nature as a very sensitive issue and which endangers the very existence of state institutions in this country, and it largely determines the nature of Mexico's relations with South America, the United States, and the Middle East. Unfortunately, the work doesn't say anything about the role of think tanks in the theory or think factories in theoretical reflection, practical implementation of the foreign policy of the Mexican government. The author mentions some major think tanks, but we know that such centers as CIDAC or CIDE quite major research institutions are quite significant and noteworthy. And finally, in the one more comment is on the section of foreign policy relations with countries of the Middle East. I believe Oxana Vladimirovna should have defined more clearly the geographical boundaries of the region in question. As the geographical, the Middle East includes West Asia, including post-Soviet states, starting with Azerbaijan, and North Africa. Oxana Vladimirovna chose Israel in the context of the conflict with Palestine, Syria, Iran, and Saudi Arabia for her study. So I think there should be some explanation, and maybe should be the analysis should be limited because Mexico foreign policy is working actively with dozens of states, and here only a limited number of states was included. Yet these remarks are not of principal nature and do not detract from the great and productive work done by the applicant. All the main objectives have been achieved at a high methodological and scientific level. The main provisions have been tested in a number of publications, as well as in the reports of Katysheva at international conferences. And I think that Oxana Vladimirovna fully deserves being awarded the degree of candidate of historical sciences, specialty 070015, history of international relations and foreign policy. Thank you for your attention. I finished my review. Alexander Ivanovich, thank you for your comments, for your valuable comments. Now I would like to give the floor to Ruslan Vasilyevich Kostyuk, professor of St. Petersburg University. Ruslan Vasilyevich, please stick to the time limit, no more than 10 minutes. Ruslan Vasilyevich, can you hear us? Yes, I'm okay. Yes. Ruslan Vasilyevich, please read your review. Remember the time limit. You have not more than 10 minutes. I see. Just the key points, please. Okay. I agree with Alexander Ivanovich that the thesis presented by Oksana Vladimirovna has obvious scientific relevance, since Mexico is one of the leading countries politically and economically in Latin America, and is a unique example of state located both in North and Latin America. Definitely, the thesis itself, considering a number of sources used and number of sources is written on a very high level, and in my official review I mentioned that the range of the source base is impressive, and it enabled the author to cope with the tasks she set. But since Natalia Alexandrovna suggested that we focus on comments and critical remarks, let me do that. And my main critical comment is that having focused on the regional dimensions, 2018, the author omitted a number of fundamental common foreign policy themes and issues, thus taking into account that in the end of the 20th century, Mexico was an active advocate of world stage for democratization of international relations, and in particular for qualitative renewal of international economic relations. It would make sense to touch upon this issue with respect to the period under consideration. Also, the thesis theme, evolution of Mexico's foreign policy in 2018, in my opinion, suggests some analysis of Mexico's approaches to such important issues as combating international terrorism, global warming, environment protection, and a number of other essential global issues. For example, the ascension of the Mexican state to the Treaty of Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which Mexico has advocated for a long time. Unfortunately, this didn't happen, didn't take place on the pages of the thesis. Also, considering in 2000 and 2018, Mexico executive power was in two political strategies, the National Action Party and the Institutional Revolutionary Party. It would be appropriate for the author to compare the general foreign policy strategies of these political parties, at least while they were in power. Also, it seems that the thesis on fundamental importance of foreign trade dimension, it would be justified, at least briefly, to address the relations of Mexican state with Taiwan, which could be done in chapter 4, and Australia, though of course with Australia is maybe it deserves a separate paragraph. However, these comments do not affect the overall positive assessment of the thesis. And in my opinion, the thesis by Oxana Katysheva corresponds to the requirements established by the corresponding order 6821/1 with order awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And in my opinion, Oxana Katysheva deserves to be awarded the degree of candidate of historical sciences, specialty 070015, History of International Relations and Foreign Policy. Thank you very much for your attention. Ruslan Vasilyevich, thank you. Yes, there are some issues. We shall discuss them later. Now, I would like to give the floor to Zbigniew Władysławowicz Ivanovsky to present his review. And briefly, please focus on the key points, because all the reviews have been published at the university website. Thank you, dear colleagues. I will try to be brief and stick to the time that I have. First of all, the thesis makes a very good impression in general. The theme is interesting. In the Institute of America, we had two theses on foreign policy. One was 10 years ago. Second one was 1 year ago. So that's a comprehensive study. The author touches on some regions and problems not covered by other authors, and that's very important. I was pleasantly impressed by number of sources, 702. So for candidates thesis, this is so that's quite an impressive number. Not even doctoral thesis is as important. That the author also has used archives and studies, maybe for historical studies. They are seldom used. This method is seldom used, relatively, but I think that's a very positive point. The author, the results have been presented, meets all the requirements, and now let me briefly focus on some comments, so not that important. So maybe there's something that the author will need in her future work. My first question is, in structuring the thesis, the author is guided by the principle used solely and included a paragraph on Russia as European direction. Considering the difficulties, we have the European Union, so we are moving in the opposite directions. I think these issues, we are facing different issues, so maybe Russia should be it's a comprehensive approach, but I think there's certain imbalance in favor of trade and economic relations, and less attention is paid to drug trafficking, illegal migration, security, development of cultural, scientific relations, etc. In my opinion, not enough coverage. These issues didn't get enough coverage. And to my next comment, advantage of the work is the abundance of too much information, and the opinion of the author, sometimes it's hard to figure out. And as an expert, it would be interesting to see interference of integration processes. Mexico is a member of NAFTA, USMCA, and the Pacific Alliance. So these two organizations are moving in the opposite directions, and when the states state-Pacific partnership, how's Mexico coping to? How is it managing to combine such different initiatives? So that will be interesting. The research hypothesis is not very clearly formulated, and it would be good to clarify it better. And the author characterizes Latin America as a unity in diversity. I wrote about this myself 5 years ago, but if we look at Latin America at the moment, we may see that there's no unity at all. CELAC is on the brink of crisis, and in January, Brazil left, so CELAC now is going through a crisis, and so we are working on a project Latin America. We in each country in the region itself, so much diversity. So I think the term does not describe reality anymore. Next, the author accuses Calderon of excessive passion for war on drugs on page 71. I think I agree with the author that Calderon did not succeed, but I wouldn't blame him for that, because for Mexico, drug trafficking, migration, these are the two essential problems, and Calderon wanted to solve, to address. So, and I think that was a good initiative, but yeah, he failed. And the author defines the Venezuelan crisis as a political. I believe that was more an institutional crisis, and was also a humanitarian and conflict between branches of power, economic, social, humanitarian aspects. Yet these comments, these are more they are more suggestions, and the author achieved her goal. Hypothesis has been confirmed, and articles published by the author fully reveal the content of the thesis. Thus, this thesis by Katysheva, Oxana, Vladimirovna corresponds to all the applicable requirements, and the author, Oxana Vladimirovna Katysheva, fully deserves to be awarded the degree of candidate of historical sciences, specialty 07015. Thank you for your attention. Dear Zbigniew Władysławowicz, thank you for your review, for deep professional insights, sharing the questions. They were very interesting. Now I would like to give the floor to our foreign colleague from Germany, to Professor Detlef Nolte. And
hello.
If possible, please try to stick to 10 minutes. Please focus on the key points of your review, comments and questions to the.
Okay, dear committee, dear colleagues, dear candidate, it was a pleasure for me to read Oksana's doctoral thesis. I learned a lot. I think this is a very interesting and timely doctoral thesis, which produces many new insights in the evolution of Mexico's foreign policy in the period from 2000 to 2018. The choice of the subject is well justified. Mexico has become a major actor in international politics with a strong participation in international trade. While a selected time frame for the analysis from the year 2000 to 2018 makes sense, I think it could be better justified, because important and groundbreaking decisions had been taken in the 1990s with the signing and ratification of the NAFTA agreement. The sequence of the empirical chapters of the dissertation is structured in accordance with the importance of the foreign policy partners, starting with the United States, which makes sense, continuing with Latin America, Europe, and more recent partnerships in Asia and the Middle East. What's a little surprising for me is that the author includes both Turkey and Russia as a subchapter in the chapter on Mexico's relations with Europe. While I think there are good arguments for considering both countries as parts of Europe, they also extend beyond Europe to other regions. So the interesting questions for me would be whether both countries are included in the Mexican Foreign Ministry in the European department or European desk, or whether they are part of a European strategy, or whether they are part of a separate department or strategy. A similar question arises with regard to the inclusion of the Middle East in the Asia chapter. In the Asia chapter, there's also no reference to India. I think in the case that India is not important for Mexico's foreign policy, it would have been sufficient to explain why it has not been included, because India is seen as an important future partner of Latin America. Also probably of marginal importance in the context of Mexican foreign policy, for the sake of completeness of the study, it would have also been interesting to include some basic information, very short, on the relations with Africa and Oceania. In her thesis, the author applies a historical approach. I'm not a historian, but in my opinion, the description of the methodology is a little bit short, with half a page, and remains also quite general. But on the other hand, the thesis is empirically well-grounded. It is based on a broad array of sources, and includes also what is, I think, important for an historian, some critical reflections on the quality and the specifics of the sources used. I think he also gives a very good overview of the state of the art. All clear? On the state of the art of research on Mexico foreign policy and on the relevant research centers. The two main hypotheses claim, on the one hand, first, that all three administrations lacked a detailed foreign policy strategy planning, and that decisions were taken ad hoc based on situational and subjective factors. Second, that there is a significant continuity in foreign policy approaches of the three presidential administrations studied in the dissertation. What is missing from this research perspective is some background information on the foreign policy decision-making process in Mexico, about the main actors, what have been the role of the presidents, the foreign minister, the minister of economy, or the minister of trade. And also, have there been any changes in the foreign ministry in the terms of professionalization during this period? How is the foreign ministry structured? What kind of departments are related to the different world regions? And what is the worldwide distribution of embassies or consulates, to have more information about the relevance of these regions for Mexican foreign policy? What about the staff and the budget of the foreign ministry? Has this changed during the three administrations? The empirical part of the study is very rich in information and very well researched, in my opinion. The author describes with great expertise the ambivalent relationship between the United States and Mexico, and the central focus was rightly placed, I think, on the NAFTA agreement and on the USMCA. And also the economic constraints and dependencies in regard to the US contrasts with its striving for more autonomy and the differentiation of trade relations. Europe has long been the preferred option in this differentiation, but as the author describes in her thesis, these expectations have not been met from a Mexican perspective. The author looks at the EU and what is important also on individual members countries, which makes a lot of sense, in my opinion. In the Mexican case, China is less important for the foreign relations than for other countries. And also the relationships with China are quite difficult due to the existing asymmetry in this relationship. And there's also some competition between China and Mexico in some economic sectors. And it also describes also in detail Mexico's recurrent efforts to deepen relations with Latin America, but also shows the constraints that result from the close ties to the United States. I think it's quite positive that in addition to traditional partners such as the European Union and the United States, also countries such as Turkey, Korea, Israel, and Japan are given more space in the study, which also reflects major changes in international politics. I think Oxana did a really great job in her dissertation, but for each doctoral thesis, decisions have to be made about which topics are not considered due to time constraints, space constraints, or other reasons. I'm not a historian, but a political scientist and a specialist in international relations. And what is missing from an international relations perspective, but which would go also beyond the scope of a historical dissertation, is a reference to theories, approaches, for example, foreign policy analysis and concepts of international relations. For example, on page 70 in the English version, the author writes, despite all the relative and controversial nature of this approach, there are two large groups of studies performed within a liberal and conservative paradigm in the American academic community. I would say from an IR perspective, one would probably systematize the approaches in a different way. The author mentions Mexico's participation in MICTA. There's now a broad debate about the role of middle powers in international politics, which could have been referred to. And also the status of Mexico in international politics is not discussed from a conceptual systemic perspective. Is it the middle power? Is it the regional power? Is it the rising power? Also, the author goes into this in some parts of the text. The interaction also between domestic politics and foreign policy could have been more elaborated. A final conclusion of the dissertation study is as follows, I quote, qualitative strengthening of the regional approach to foreign policy, along with a deepening of strategic planning, can provide Mexico with new opportunities and tools for inclusion in the world system based on the principle of multiple vectors of foreign policy. Also, I think that this is a very good suggestion. The recommendation contradicts findings of the study that Mexico's foreign policy is little planned and rather reactive, and that Mexico has only slightly reduced its dependence from the United States. So it's more good wishing, or is there some empirical foundation for this recommendation? I will come to the end. I think Oxana has written a very exciting, informative, and innovative doctoral thesis. The topic is up to date and also politically relevant for the relations of Mexico, but also for the foreign relations of Russia. When reading the doctoral thesis, I was really impressed by the breadth of knowledge of the author of Mexico's foreign policy. At first, I was a little bit skeptical whether it would be possible to analyze the entire Mexican foreign policy with all world regions over a period of 18 years and with 150 pages in the English version. But at the end, the results of the thesis convinced me that it is possible. The author describes the multi-layered external relations of Mexico with extraordinary knowledge. She impressively processes a lot of information to contextualize Mexican foreign policy in a changing international environment. In a dissertation, Oxana breaks new ground in the research on Mexican foreign policy in the period from 2000 to 2080. In my opinion, she demonstrates not only very good knowledge of Mexican foreign policy, but also a very broad knowledge of key developments in the international system since the turn of the century. Her arguments are developed eloquently. Overall, this is a highly impressive, sophisticated, insightful, and well-designed dissertation, which will no doubt make a significant and original contribution to the knowledge on Mexican foreign policy in Russia and beyond. And it will fuel the academic debate. So in my opinion, the submitted doctoral thesis meets the criteria for a degree in historical science. Thank you very much.
Professor Nolte, спасибо вам большое за...
Professor Nolte, thank you for your professional review. Of course, the global approach is present to cover all the spheres of foreign policy of Mexico. But for that purpose, our PhD students do their thesis. We have one more review to be presented of the chairman of Tsvetkova Natalia Alexandrovna. And with your permission, I will be brief. I will skip compliments, though, of course, I would like to say same things already said, to continue by saying that the thesis is a success. And for the translator, let me ask two questions. Dear applicants, the questions will continue what was already mentioned by Ruslan Vasilievich, Zbigniew Vladislavich, as a triangle of Mexico, USA, and China. Oxana Vladimirovna, can we say that before the arrival of President Trump, the relationship between the USA and Mexico, a bilateral relationship, could be characterized by a certain Mexicanization of the US-Mexico relationship, and such issues such as NAFTA, illegal migration, trade in Mexico has been able to take a leading position and to get something from the US. Alexander Ivanovich is gone, so maybe he went to lock the door. So we shall take a short technical break. Wait for Alexander Ivanovich. I think he went to lock the door, or maybe to get himself some water. Alexander Ivanovich, can you hear us? Let's wait some more. Dear colleagues, the technical break is over. Alexander Ivanovich is back, and let me check that he can hear me. Okay, so that will be my first question. And my second question, Oksana Vladimirovna, turning to the history of US policies on building global trade in the Asia-Pacific region, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and at the same time, the US tried to pursue a policy of containment of China. Can we say that Mexico followed its course, independent course toward China, without looking back at the US? So these are the two important questions essential for American studies: the role of Mexico in external policy, and the role of Mexico in. So these are my two questions. These comments do not affect the overall positive assessment of the thesis, dear colleagues, and the theme of the thesis is relevant, and the scientific significance is beyond any doubt. The thesis by Katysheva Oksana Vladimirovna on the theme evolution of foreign policy of Mexico in 2018 meets the basic requirements established by the order the 1st of September 2016, 6821/1, on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the applicant, Oksana Vladimirovna Katysheva, deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of History in Specialty 070015, History of International Relations and Foreign Policy. So this is my review as a chairman at that. we shall continue according to our procedure, and that is, shall be followed by the applicant shall now answer questions asked and comments. Oksana Vladimirovna, you have 15 minutes. You've been asked many questions. You can take a little, your answers may take a little longer because we have saved some time on review presentation, but I'm asking you to try and stick to. Thank you. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, dear members of the Dissertation Council, for your reviews and comments, issues to which you paid your attention. I will start answering questions as they were asked by the members of the Dissertation Council. Alexander Ivanovich Kubyshkin on the doctrines of foreign policy. In the analyzed period, the Mexican authorities have largely moved away from the previous concepts, now returning just under López Obrador. So they were more focused on the national development plan and foreign economic components. So the concepts and doctrines of foreign policy got less attention than could be expected. And Mexico's constitution of 1917 was revolutionary and defined a legal framework for the country's foreign policy, had a significant impact on the national legislation of other countries in the region. In turn, the foreign policy doctrines arising from the evolution and historical experience of the state in the international arena become the basis for establishment of certain principles that guide the state in its international practice at certain historical moments and considered important for the future of international relations. In that sense, the Cardenas doctrine mentioned by you doesn't, according to all researchers, this is not classified as such, because it's largely based on doctrines by Calvo, Draga, and Carran's. So it cannot be considered original. However, because it's worth a separate critical and very extensive study, is not my aim in this thesis, so remained outside the scope of my thesis. And it's of course true, one cannot but agree that the problem of drug trafficking is of critical importance for the system of regional relations with Western Hemisphere. And this fact is reflected in both the first and the second chapters of my thesis. And there's a chapter on relations with Japan and APR, but combating drug trafficking. But it's also important to note that the scale of the problem also deserves a special study, which was not my objective in this study. And of course, it should be acknowledged that didn't mention factories of the thought or think tanks such as SIDA and SIDA, but SIDA materials were widely used in preparation of this study as evidence by a list of sources. As for the framework of the Middle East, this study is predetermined by the Mexican foreign policy tradition and includes states of North Africa and West Asia, except the post-Soviet states belonging to Central Asian region. The selection of specific states for analysis was carried out in accordance, firstly, with priorities identified at the level of official foreign policy documents, and secondly, on the volume of trade and the economic relations. I will now proceed to the comments by Kostuk Ruslan Vasilovich. It's necessary to recognize the validity of remarks made by Ruslan Vasilyevich on the some shortcomings of the thesis. But as Ruslan Vasilyevich himself rightly points out, most of them were inevitable in the context of chosen perspective on the evolution of Mexican foreign policy in 2018. And the adopted geographical principle predetermined the structure of my study and in some ways narrowed the possibilities of considering a number of fundamental general policy topics and issues to which Ruslan Vasilyevich points out. This is especially true with regard to issues of broad global agenda, such as Mexico's approaches to combating international terrorism, global warming, the problem of non-proliferation, nuclear weapons, etc. But yet these issues, problems, in 2017, Mexico signed a treaty on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. It was mentioned in my thesis. Determined discussion and direction between Mexico and China. They voted for convention on proliferation of nuclear weapons on the 12th of December 2014, though the US and European countries voted against. Also, I understand that comparing general political strategies of two Mexican political parties, the representatives were in power during the historical period in question, would be appropriate. The peculiarities of my thesis led me to drop more detailed relations with one another country. These questions are certainly important for me in my future research, and I especially limited the list of states under consideration, firstly by priorities outlined at the level of official foreign policy documents, and secondly by the amount of trade and extent of economic relations. The only exception in the sense was Russia, which was not was included in the study on the basis of jus soli principle. Let me proceed to comments made by Zbigniew Władysławowicz Ivanovsky. First of all, it's necessary to admit the wording of my hypothesis is not very good, but I'd like to believe that in my presentation, I succeeded to clarify it. Also, it's impossible to disagree with some parts of my thesis are too descriptive. In the course of my future research, I plan to focus on my analytical skills, in particular, interference of integration processes caused by simultaneous membership of Mexico in NAFTA, USMCA, and the Pacific Alliance. Indeed, this subject didn't get due attention in my studies, so hopefully I will do that in the future. Will include my future research, and I certainly agree that the Venezuelan crisis should be characterized as systemic. Further, sharing the assessment of interest of the Russian-Mexican relationship with the Russian reader, I have to disagree with the need to expand this story to the separate chapter in my thesis, as shown in the relevant paragraph. Intensity of the Mexican-Russian relations and the importance of the Mexican political elite is very limited. So, given the objectives of this paper, dedicating an entire chapter to the Russo-Mexican relations would introduce significant imbalance in its structure. With regard to the imbalance in favor of trade and the economic relations, this comment is to some extent true, but the imbalance appears to have reflected the reality, both at the level of relevant documents and in practical terms trade and economic relations were of fundamental importance for the Mexican government, since they were assessed as a key instrument for addressing the most national challenges, including security, migration, etc. In a sense, this also applies to the issue of violence. I believe that the academic community tends to negative, excessive drug trafficking is taken from North American. It seems that this problem is much broader, and its solution lies in the social, economic sphere of social. And which no president has yet managed to address. And finally, with regard to Latin America's unity in diversity, this definition is used by the author in the introduction, and this is not my, so the reference is made, was intended to outline ideal trajectory of global architecture in the chronological period under study. I meant that the consolidated position in the Latin American region can potentially have a more significant contribution to the formation of polycentric world order. However, the actual state of system is quite rightly characterized in terms of extreme polarization, with, as mentioned by Zbigniew Władysławicz, and no one can argue, of course, with that. Thank you, for Dr. Nolte, for your comments and questions. Let me proceed to my answers. The choice of chronological framework of the study was substantiated in detail in the introduction to the thesis, and so I will not repeat it. So I should like to note that after US MCA agreement was not the direct object of the study, so it was not my task to stick to its chronology, signing it. With regard to criteria for selecting countries, as already mentioned, I was guided by Mexico officially designated priorities set forth in its foreign policy documents, and secondly, by the level of economic relations. So a number of countries that are certainly important in international politics were either not considered or considered to a lesser extent, even if they are interesting in themselves. With regard to organizational structure of the Mexican foreign ministry departments, I cannot but admit post facto that for the sake of clarity, a relevant diagram in the annex should have been provided, and an individual section in the thesis should be included. On this substance, I'd like to say that following Turkey is part of European department, as indicated in page 127 in the Russian version, as well as Russia. And countries of the Middle East belong to the Department of Africa and the Middle East. Same department includes Asian Pacific, while Central Asian countries belong to the Asia Pacific department, including India, China, Oceania, and Australia. These structural units described on page 34, unfortunately in the Russian version, the corresponding division was not, especially was not mentioned, included in the thesis, because I wanted to avoid disproportion that would have been inevitable due to peculiarities of Mexico's international relationship. Speaking of financial aspects of separate bodies and structural divisions, very scarcely described in my thesis. I hope that in the future I shall take up this subject in my future studies as a theory of making political decisions in Mexico, as I did in this thesis in the framework of my goals and objectives, because impact certain, and moreover, there's a certain change of approaches that's outside the geographical principle, and acknowledging that my thesis pays less attention to analysis of foreign policy in the field of international relations. Let me explain that this was due to the fact that the work is historical and it permits a shift of accents in this way. within the framework of the research hypothesis, it was more important to show the fundamental changes that took place outside these concepts. As for the contradiction that the professor saw in the final thesis, I allow myself to disagree. The thesis demonstrates that the Mexican foreign policy lacks sufficient strategic planning, and that the state's dependence on the United States remains quite high. But that does not exclude the potential for Mexico to develop a proper foreign policy strategy and with qualitative strengthening of the regional approach to foreign policy to find new foreign policy opportunities and tools, including to strengthen its position in the face of the United States. This is not an easy task, but it seems doable since Mexico has the intellectual capacity to do this. Also, I'd like to proceed to comments made by Natalia Alexandrovna. Natalia Alexandrovna, your questions open a wide field for discussion in terms of gradual Mexicanization of the North American political and economic agenda, the growing dependence between Mexico, United States, and Canada has led to increasing contacts in all areas of interaction, more investment to Mexico, and reorganization of domestic Mexican agenda, which includes, in particular, the problems of organized crime and migration. This kind of Mexicanization certainly took place. But if the term means a process of Mexico's leadership in dialogue with its North American partners on a wide range of issues, that seems that my thesis has convincingly disproved this thesis. Some examples can be found on pages 38-39, showing that approaches proposed by the Fox administration regarding the content of Mexico-American relations were not adopted, which led to the fact that the initiative to form a vector both bilateral and regional relations left to Washington, and the problem that really interested Mexicans replaced by American war on terrorism. Even more revealing in this regard is Merida's initiative, which in fact meant that Mexico recognized North American approaches to combating drug trafficking. So on page 34, I also point out to the existence of formal attributes of subordination of Mexican instruments to instruments of the United States, which include the legal form of agreement, namely, there was a unilateral act as well as certain limitations on financial procedure that could be unilaterally imposed, are imposed by the American side. During the period of function of Pena Nieto's administration before the arrival of Donald Trump, this dependence becomes less obvious, firstly due to intensification of Mexican diplomatic work to expand their bilateral agenda at the expense of issues of joint development, border cooperation in the sphere of education, issues that didn't touch upon the critical issues of the U.S., and a certain revision of Mexican approaches to security issues. And with Obama's support for structural reforms in Mexico that are important to U.S. capital. However, this positive trend did not lead to a radical breakthrough, and the foreign policy initiative remained in the hands of Washington, and the structural dependence of Mexican political system on the content and quality of Mexican-American relations did not disappear. Merida's initiative remained relevant, and migration became mainly a declarative part of the bilateral agenda. And Trump's victory and his highly aggressive only exacerbated the contradictions between the parties. As for the study of Mexico during the presidency of Pena Nieto, on his own course with regard to APAC and above all China, without looking at the results of the presented thesis allowed to partly agree with such opinion, but there's certain reservations. The strength and innovation Pacific vector of foreign policy by the administration of Pena Nieto was a continuation of the efforts made by Calderon, but also in the interests of the United States to promote their Trans-Pacific partnership, which coincided with a period of benevolent patronage by the administration of Obama. As I just mentioned, therefore, the general vector to develop Mexico's ties with APAC was not opposed in Washington. As a consequence, Mexico has consistently strengthened its ties with individual regional players in line with its own national agenda. But strengthening of China's position in Mexico was seen by Washington as a threat and counter-react to certain U.S. efforts aimed at ousting a serious economic competitor from Mexico to minimize risk of transforming its economic influence into political influence. And at the same time, Mexico's own position with respect to China, its economy was a serious competitor to Mexico in the North American market, is characterized on the basis of study as passive. Thus, the US-Mexico-China triangle during the period under consideration, Washington continued to hold leading position that Mexico could not ignore. And even as China won, as President Peña Nieto was condemned by United States and led to negative ratings of the president in the war against corruption. Family of Nieto is anti-China mood. Thank you very much. I hope you were very convincing. Thank you, Oxana Vladimirovna. Your answers were very good. All your answers were very convincing. According to our procedure, I have to read questions sent by email, but no questions. So there's no questions to answer. And that is why I'm glad to give the floor to the academic advisor, Viktor Lazarovich. Please turn the sound on and the camera. Can you hear? Can you see us? And I invite you to characterize the applicant, Oksana Vladimirovna. Viktor Lazarovich, you only have 3 minutes for that. I'm very pleased to do so. Oksana Vladimirovna took her several years to prepare for today's defense. She worked successfully and she was very focused, which is evidenced not only by her articles but presentations at prestigious international conferences, including LASA, which is the most important conference for Latin studies. And there, her presentation allowed to test this. Oksana Vladimirovna is not only is a researcher, but she's involved in practical activities on the popularization of Latin American, organized a number of initiatives in St. Petersburg. Some took place at St. Petersburg University, which is also very important, and demonstrates that Oksana Vladimirovna is not she's an important part of her life, her research. And while working on her thesis, we not always agreed, but she was able to convince me to prove her points. And I think that's a very important talent for a researcher. And finally, what I wanted to add is that I would like to congratulate Oksana Vladimirovna on her birthday, which is today, on her Defense Day. Thank you. Oh wow, that's as your academic advisor. That's a good academic advisor. Thank you very much. Thank you, Viktor Lazarevich, for your opinion. We're familiar with the list of publications, the list of presentations made at international conferences. It is very impressive, and it is obvious from the thesis and from how it was presented, her findings she presented. So we are moving towards the voting part. We have to take some preliminary steps here. Let me ask you some questions with your permission. Dear colleagues, do members of the Dissertation Council or others present, the applicant herself, any unanswered questions related to working in the remote access mode? Is everything clear? Has everyone succeeded to communicate his ideas, questions? Yes, everything is okay. Everything is okay. And the second important question, before voting, we may or may not take a technical break for a private discussion with the sound off. So do we need such a technical break to discuss the results of the defense, or we can proceed straight to individual? I think we can proceed straight to voting. I agree. Dr. Ivanovsky, Dr. Nolte, what do you think? Yes, we have already said everything we wanted to say. Dr. Nolte, hopefully, also is ready to go straight to voting. Is that right, Dr. Nolte?
Yes.
Доктор Nolte сказал да. Okay, if we don't need time to discuss the presentation, let us proceed to voting. Dear colleagues, the voting shall take place as follows. I shall ask each member of the council, and you have to give your opinion in public and individually, one by one. That is why I put the question of awarding the academic degree of Candidate of Historical Sciences to Katysheva Oxana Vladimirovna, Specialization 070015, History of International Relations and Foreign Policy, to the open individual vote. Let me remind you that a decision of the Dissertation Council should be considered positive if more than a half, but not less than 3 members of the council present at the meeting voted for it in accordance with Article 23 of the order. That is why I shall call names of each member of the Dissertation Council and ask them for their opinions. For, against. Alexander Ivanovich Kubyshkin, your opinion. I vote for awarding the degree of Candidate of Historical Sciences to Oxana Vladimirovna Katysheva. Accepted. Thank you. Dear Ruslan Vasilovich, your opinion. I am for awarding the degree Candidate of Historical Sciences. Thank you. Zbigniew Vladislavovich, your opinion, please. I also vote for awarding the degree. I think the thesis fully corresponds to the requirements, and I vote for. Thank you, Zbigniew Vladislavovich. And finally, Dr. Nolte.
Ваше мнение.
What is your opinion? Shall we award the degree to
PhD?
It's an excellent thesis, and I'm in favor to award the degree.
Thank you. And finally, Tsvetkova Natalia Alexandrovna, the chairman, of course. I believe the degree It's a good decision to award the degree of candidate of historical sciences to Oxana Vladimirovna Katysheva. I'm for awarding the degree. Now I'm counting the votes, and dear colleagues, let me announce that out of 5 members of the Dissertation Council members present at the meeting, 5 voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained, to be precise, to the maximum. And the decision of the Dissertation Council, the decision to award the degree of Candidate of Historical Sciences, Specialty 070015, History of International Relations and Foreign Policy, has been made. The decision was to award the degree has been made. Dear colleagues, since our meeting is held in the remote access mode, do the council members or the applicant have any questions regarding the procedure of our meeting? No. No. And we have one more point, very important, the final word, the closing remarks of the applicant. We congratulate Oxana Vladimirovna. You have the floor for your closing remarks for more than 2 minutes. Thank you very much for giving the floor to me. Thank you, Chairman Natalia Alexandrovna. And it was very much because of Natalia Alexandrovna being my professor at the bachelor's program, the master's program. You convinced me that I can continue research at a new level, bring it, and it led to many years of hard work. And Dr. Lazarovich also tried to guide me in the right direction in my research and to promote Latin American studies in Russia. Thank you that Dr. Nolter, Viktor Lazarovich mentioned that LASTA is an important conference, world conference of Latin American studies. And one of the meetings with Dr. Nolter occurred during this conference. Viktor Lazarovich, St. Petersburg University, gave brilliant opportunity for everyone interested in Latin American studies. Every 2 years, there's a conference to which researchers from all around the world are invited, which gave to scientists and to me personally to learn, to share opinions, and to become involved in the international community of Latin American studies. Thank you very much, Zbigniew Władysławowicz, for such brilliant conceptual review. I was so pleased to read and to answer your questions. Alexander Ivanovich, thank you very much. Also for your support, for your great work. Also, I'd like to especially thank Lazar Solomonovich, is leading expert on Latin American studies, a world expert. Hopefully he's watching, and his support, his praise always supported me, and I was always, his opinion has always been very important for me, very significant for me. And finally, I'd like to say to thank my husband. I don't know if he's watching this, because his attention, the stress, all the stress he had to experience while I was working on my thesis and my research. I would like to thank my husband for his patience, for his love, for his support. And hopefully my mother's watching me, can see me, and I would be very happy to toast my birthday with you today, but unfortunately, our meeting is held in this session. Thank you very much again, everybody. I'm very grateful. This is a great gift for me. Thank you, everybody. Oksana Vladimirovna, thank you for your sincere words on behalf of our Dissertation Council. Let me congratulate you again. That is a great stage, a very important stage, phase in your life. That's a big step. And with your permission, at that wonderful note, let me declare today's meeting finished. I thank everybody for excellent reviews, for interesting discussion. And once again, I congratulate you, Oksana Vladimirovna. Thank you, everybody. I ask, please stop the online broadcasting. Thank you.